about the whole defining veganism, which is a really important issue. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Dr. Roger Yates from currently Dublin in Ireland, and Mr. Benny Malone coming from Ellesmere Port, close to the home of football, which is, of course, Goodison Park, just within sight of Benny, and I've got one eye on the football schools. That aside, Benny, Roger, welcome to our afternoon session.
Thank you.
Hello, Tim. Thank you.
Right. Well, we've got limited time, so I better crack on, I suppose. So, Pete, could we have the slides, please? Right. So my first job really is to give a whistle-stop tour of a bit of a history of the vegan social movement, and but with a focus on the actual definition of veganism. That's what we're all about today. And we always start with a clarification, or at least I do, in terms of with my talks. When I talk about the veganism, I'm really talking about the vegan social movement, generally speaking. And what that basically means is that I'm not suggesting that the people who started the vegan social movement were the first vegans, or could be claimed to be the first vegans, and that people who could be classed as vegans have existed before and globally. And in fact, if you look at the little slide there with the picture of Donald Watson, that's from a 2014 history of the Vegan Society, when the Vegan Society was 70 years old. And that's a point that they made. There's always been vegans. You know, in fact, in Britain, ironically, before the vegans, there were vegetarians who were what we would class as dietary vegans. They might not have been philosophical vegans, but they would be dietary vegans. Ironically, that changed when the Vegetarian Society was founded, because there were some people who founded the Vegetarian Society who consumed products that were derived from other animals, and so they incorporated that into their definition of vegetarian. And in fact, that created an argument within the vegetarian community, which went on from something like 1910 through to the 1940s. By the 1940s, we had the emergence of the vegans, really. And what happened there was that they were pushing for a non-dairy section of the Vegetarian Society. And the vegetarians said no to that. And I've always claimed that that did veganism and vegan philosophy in particular a favor. What the vegetarians said, quite politely, is that we want to concentrate on the abolition of flesh products. So if you want to go elsewhere, then maybe strike out on your own, which is what the vegans did, which was a great thing in the end. This is a screenshot of a famous magazine newsletter, the Vegan News. This is 1944, so this is Donald Watson cranking it out on a kind of Gestetner type machine. And this is a really important document in the history of our movement. It's 4 pages long, still available online. And one interesting thing about it is that the word vegan wasn't really coined at this stage, even though, well, they were looking for a name for the society. And so Watson in this document said, you know, can we come up with a name? And a few names had come in, some of them, you know, quite fancy. And luckily for us, I suppose, that they came down in the end with the idea, well, let's just call it vegan, which is obviously what Watson liked. And to clear up another issue is that there's always been a contentious issue about who coined the word vegan. Elsie Shrigley had a claim to that, and there was always this idea that it was some combination of Shrigley and Dorothy Morgan and Donald Watson. And what Watson claims here, this is the Donald Watson archive, really brilliant kind of thing that's going on at the moment, archiving Watson's writing. He says that in between dances, him and Dot, which is Dorothy Morgan, who became Dorothy Watson, came up with the word vegan, which is, you know, kind of clarifies that issue to some extent. So moving on then to the idea and the meaning of veganism, this is within a year of the foundation of the vegan social movement. So this is 1945. And personally, I think this is one of the most powerful statements of veganism. If this was the definition of veganism even without that little bit about profitable at the bottom, I would be quite satisfied. So this is Watson not claiming this is an official definition. He was actually answering a question, and he said the object of the vegan society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life. And I think just that one bold statement is a great thing to have been said, and it would suit me to be the philosophy. So going back then to this history that I mentioned, there is a section of it which is really important because it talks about the evolution of ideas, and it talks about how the vegan social movement had been formed. They got stuck in and started working as a social movement. Donald Watson had the lion's share of all the work. And then 5 years later, Leslie Cross says, hang on a second, we've got a definition of the vegan diet, but we don't have a definition of veganism. And so that's what they set out to do next. And as you can see there at the middle of that little slide, it says that it's about, liberating other animals essentially. And then that was jigged a little bit more. And so it brought in things like food, commodities, hunting, vivisection. So it was never limited to a diet, which is an important thing to say, obviously in terms of a philosophical stance. And so this is why Leslie Cross becomes a very central part of the history of our movement. As I said, in terms of the evolution of vegan philosophy and the meaning, the definition of vegan, he was working on that from about 1949 through to about 55. That's most of his writing about that. He talked about the two broad aspects of veganism, which I translate into focus and scope. And he always stressed, Watson did as well, but he always stressed that veganism would be a great benefit to humanity. And last from me before we move on, really, is I always like to throw these two quotes up because they're so good. One from 64 and one, well, it says 1995 on the slide, but that was the second edition. It's actually 1985. So these really are talking about the scope of veganism, I would argue, rather than the kind of narrow focus of it. And so I always like to put those up because they're kind of brilliant, kind of expansive views of what vegan philosophy is all about. So here we have the definition that we now all know and we all love, don't we, Benny? And so this, I mentioned 1979. This is when this definition started to evolve. In fact, it was kind of finished by 1988. So I regard it as a 1979 to 1988 definition. At first, it didn't have that last sentence in there. So there's a bit of tinkering around. But this is the official definition as we know it now of veganism. And it was when the society was formalizing, professionalizing, becoming a registered charity.